Owners of retirement flats and their families are still being caught out by unexpected charges. The problem has already been investigated by the Office for Fair Trading, and the Law Commission says all fees should be disclosed to buyers early, clearly and prominently. But leases for retirement flats and bungalows often include fees that have to be paid even when they're empty, and there are restrictions on letting and on selling them on. Penelope Garnham wrote to us about what happened to her family when they inherited her mother's flat after she died.
We thought we would like to sell it. We had to make first offer to Methodist Housing, who owned the building. They didn't want to buy it, so we hoped to sell it through an agent, and that's where the problems started. The estate agent weren't allowed to put up a signboard advertising it. We thought perhaps we would let it. We were told we couldn't let it. There were various restrictions. People had to meet specific criteria. They said we weren't allowed to sublet. And we said, well, perhaps we could move in, my husband and I. We're over 60, so we meet the age criteria. But they said, no, you don't meet the health criteria. And after 6 months, when the flat had been empty, we then had to start paying council tax. Well, we're both pensioners, didn't have any income apart from our pensions, state pensions. We wrote to the council and they put it on hold till the apartment was sold. We also were supposed to be paying maintenance charge, service charge and a well-being package. We queried this because I said, Mum's dead. You can't look after her. She's not here. She's dead. And they said, oh yes, you have to pay that. Finances started mounting up and mounting up.
I'm guessing that these conditions must have been in the lease. Had you read the lease at the time that your mother bought?
I was never shown the lease. I had an awful job to get hold of the lease after she had died. When I eventually saw the lease, I saw that it had been, Mum had signed it, obviously. I can only assume that somebody took the lease up one day and said, oh, you need to sign this, Mrs. Clark, and that's what she did.
How was this all resolved in the end?
In the end, Bradford Council wrote to us and said, you have an empty apartment, and in as many words they said, this is a blot on the landscape. We don't welcome empty apartments. Do you wish to sell it or let it? Do you need any help? And I rang them up and said, yes, please, and told them what had happened. They were extremely helpful. They were very, very concerned, and they were very angry. But they also had a great deal of difficulty contacting Methodist Housing, and eventually they insisted that Methodist Housing buy the apartment, which they did at $85,000, giving us a loss of £40,000. Then we had to pay the maintenance charge, the service charge, the council tax and the wellbeing package. All in all, we lost a huge amount of money. The wellbeing and maintenance came to £10,000.
Penelope Garnham. Sebastian O'Kelly is a former property journalist and he now runs the charity Campaign Against Retirement Leasehold Exploitation. Sebastian, what do you think about what happened to Penelope?
Well, it's an appalling example, but by no means unusual. I anticipate that retirement housing will lose about 40% in value from new, and this was slightly less than that. We're dealing with a case at the moment of a family who bought a retirement flat for $205,000. It's just been sold to a commercial operator for £18,000. That's a 90% fall in value.
Gosh, that is a lot. Penelope's mum was very well looked after by Methodist Housing, and they say they have to keep on with these wellbeing fees when the flats are empty because those fees are paying for services for everyone. The Law Commission is looking into this at the moment, and they say that developers need these fees, or many of these developments, they just wouldn't be viable. Do you accept that?
I think they're two separate things. You do have to pay the service charges even if the flat is empty. In this case, the elderly relative died. In some cases, the elderly relative goes into further care. So you have the care costs as well as having to maintain an empty flat and try to sell it. So it can be financially crippling for some families where the relative has to go into further care. The Law Commission report is looking at exit fees, which are a slightly different thing. Some of these fees are completely unjustifiable. The Office of Fair Trading has announced in 2013 that they were likely to be unfair contract terms, but then did nothing about it. And the Law Commission isn't addressing this. It's really up to pensioners to mount a High Court legal action, which simply isn't going to happen.
The Methodist Housing Association also told us that since Penelope's mother bought the flat, they've helped draw up a new consumer code for retirement homes, and that their fees are now much clearer, much more transparent. The Law Commission is talking about drawing up a single code of practice for everyone who runs these retirement homes. Do you think that might be the answer?
No, it's not an answer, but it is a help. What we've got in some of these retirement sites is exit fees on sale that are for no service whatsoever. In this particular example, the Methodist Housing Association was mounting up charges because it was an empty flat and there were service charges. In some other mainstream commercial properties, there's a 1% exit fee for no service whatsoever except for the remuneration of the freeholder. This is the exit fee which the Office of Fair Trading said was an unfair contract term, but has done nothing about it. The Law Commission is not going to address that. Yes, we need more transparency in this sector. It is appalling that at the moment in this country only 2% of over 60s live in specialist retirement accommodation. In the United States it's 17%, in Australia it's 12%. There is absolutely no prospect of the over 60s moving into retirement accommodation if it's an appalling offering, which it is at the moment.
Sebastian O'Kelly, thank you very much for that.